And now we are going to jump to the next second stage, which is the indie rock stage. So welcome to the indie rock stage. And in that, in this stage, you will have three speakers that will starting with Harry Ramachandran, who he was part of our conference on the various specs, several PAC in fact. So it's a pleasure to have Harry part with us. Next, we will have Chandresh Gupta. So first PAC for Chandresh. So it's welcome on board, Chandresh. We'll see that in a few minutes. We'll talk about intelligence automations in performance management. And then we will have Shami Nariyaman, who will talk about conundrum of cloud testing. So stay with us in the next few hours. There are a lot of awesome topics that will be covered in the next few hours. So the first rock star of this indie stage, rock indie stage, it's Harry. Harry is more than 18 years of experience. He has created a large performance testing COE for Cognizant with more than 1,700 participants. Today, Harry is going to talk about assuring high performance and availability for Salesforce implementations. How are you today, Harry?
Hey, Hendrik, doing good. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm awake.
It's audible?
We will see in 20 hours. But currently, I'm very good. Thanks.
Good. So is it audible, Hendrik?
Your voice is perfect.
Great. Okay. I'll share my screen as well. Thanks, Hendrik. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, based on the location you are in. This is Hari Ramachandran, joining from Cognizant, Chennai, India. So today, probably as Hendrik mentioned, I'll talk about assuring high performance and availability for Salesforce implementations. Customer relationship management solutions has become an indispensable tool for clients across industries, right? In spite of pandemic, global spend on CRM products is increasing in double digit. I think they are clocking around 14% growth year on year, and SaaS takes the bulk of the share, right? SaaS products, and Salesforce is a clear leader when it comes to CRM products, right? Salesforce helps the business, right? It provides the platform to build applications faster. It integrates with external systems easily. It provides a collaboration platform where we can work across the company, integrate with all the other systems, provide a holistic view, right? And today, if you look into it, Salesforce is used globally across multiple companies and global users, and they also use different devices, different channels to access Salesforce applications, right? But while there are a lot of benefits when we look into Salesforce as a product or SaaS, more from a SaaS standpoint, but when you implement some of these SaaS product, it comes with its own challenges and risks, right? So in today's presentation, I just want to give a quick overview on the overall Salesforce ecosystem. What are the performance issues that we hear from the end users, from the IT team? What are the challenges that we have in any typical performance validation, and what is the right strategy to be applied right before in pre-implementation as well as post-implementations, followed by Q&A, right? So that's what I want to cover in today's session. So when you look into customer experience, right? So providing superior customer experience is key for any application, right? And Salesforce is not an exception to it, right? If you look into most of the analyst reports, brands with superior customer experience bring in 5.7 times more revenue than competitors, right? And people usually stick to any application if it performs better, provides a safe and secure platform, and it's also easily accessible and adoptable, right? And when you look into some of the Salesforce application, this is not an exception, right? Salesforce application being a SaaS product, I think the expectations from end users are the application should be easy to use, it should be faster, and it should be accessible across different geographic locations, right? So when we move on, more from a market shifts, right? Well, what we are seeing from a market standpoint, what are the different things that we are seeing more from a market standpoint, right? Businesses or agility, right? That is driving the overall focus. I think customers want to take application faster to production, and which means they don't want to spend months and years in developing an application, right? They wanted to take applications much more faster, probably in days and weeks. And customer experience being predominant one, they are also looking at how they can move from a on-premise legacy CRM software to more focused on customer experience platform, right? Which helps them to adopt the platform much faster and at a speeder rate. The second, when you look into some of the vendors in the space, they are again moving away from the traditional system to platform play, right? They wanted to provide the agility back to the customers. They wanted to increase the overall release time, reduce the cost, and then also increase the overall customer experience of the product, right? So they are moving away from traditional backend systems to more like a platform play, right? And they are also leveraging the technology shifts that are happening, right? On how do we leverage the power of cloud, how do we leverage the power of AI, and bring in a very holistic experience to end user, which will give an end-to-end user experience back to the products, right? So Salesforce is also getting into some of these aspects, right? They have it's a SaaS product. We will probably get into some of those details, right? So when we just look into Salesforce, it's a SaaS-based application. So when we talk about say a SaaS-based product, right? They take care of their overall maintenance of the backend application infrastructure, any upgrades, troubleshooting that needs to happen from an application standpoint. Everything is taken care of by Salesforce, right? And Salesforce, if you look into it, they have 3 primary releases in a year, and they continuously optimize the platform to assure high performance, right? And they also operate on a trusted multi-tenant architecture, which means one, they provide safe and secure access to the data that is getting stored, but it's also a multi-tenant architecture, right? So where multiple customers or multiple businesses or organizations share the common infrastructure, right? And Salesforce is known for the UI with the acquisition of Lightning component. They also provide rich UI for end users, and now with all those new components that they have brought in, Salesforce is accessible in mobile. And if you also look into some of those current integrations, they are also integrating with IoT, where if you have any IoT devices, it can also be integrated into the Salesforce platform, right? And with the Einstein coming in, it also provides the flexibility to do a detailed analysis and then provide the right kind of metrics, right? If you look into the core platform as such from a Salesforce standpoint, the core one is on the force.com or the Lightning platform, right? Which is the core platform for Salesforce. And if you and on top of it, there are other applications, right? App Exchange helps to interact with the other applications. It's a marketplace for Salesforce, right? Where Salesforce provides some basic applications, and it also provides a platform for third-party vendors, developers to create their own applications, right? So on top of it, you have all the functional clouds. And each of them are defined for a specific activity, right? So we have Sales Cloud, there is a Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, Community Cloud, and now we also have Commerce Cloud as well, right? Each one of them are functional components which provide a very specific functionality to the areas, right? And there are a lot of services which provide the different activities, right? And on top of it, if you also look into some of the new things that are happening, so while this address some of the functional aspects, there is also a critical ask on how do we address it from an industry standpoint, right? So now they have expanded it, and then we also have the industry clouds there. Probably we have options to have, if you are a healthcare customer, you can adopt to Health Cloud, which has 80 to 90% of what is required for a healthcare customer be customized and then available, right? So something similar, there is Salesforce Cloud for financials, consumers, and marketing cloud, right? Not just these are all Salesforce products, but in addition, there are also third-party vendors who provide these tools as well, right? If you look into on the right-hand side, you have Velocity, Viva, which also are third-party products. Some of them come at so free of cost. Some of them are more like a licensed product which the customers can buy. It comes with 80-90% of customization, right? You can just take the product, deploy it, and then start using it for your application. So Salesforce, in summary, provides the flexibility to build the applications faster. And it's a SaaS product, and it has a multi-tenant architecture, right? If you look into the core platform, the database, it's an Oracle. They use Oracle database to store the data, and then on top of it, there is a virtual database that they create, right? And that's where there are a lot of tuning. They bring in a lot of their own components to store the data, retrieve the data at a very faster rate, right? And then on top of it, if you look into it from an architecture standpoint, there are app server containers or Jetty containers, right? Which takes the request from the end users, identify which services needs to be routed to, and then route the request to the right services, right? So again, there are Java-based containers which sit on the front, which will take the request and then service it, right? And more from a language standpoint, if you look into it, they use Apex. It's a programming language used by Salesforce for customizing some of these customizing some of the platforms or coding from a Salesforce standpoint, right? So that's a quick summary on Salesforce and the infrastructure. If you look into some of the voice of customers, right? When we look into large implementations, IT teams as well as end users, right? They often run into challenges during or after implementing a Salesforce applications, right? Most of the time, when we look at end users, they start complaining that the Salesforce application is slow because they'll be using the application from a mobile device. They'll be far off from their work location. They'll be traveling across the globe, and they'll be trying to access the application. And that this is a common complaint that we have received with most of our customer implementations, where they come back and say, "Hey, I'm accessing this application from this location using this device, and the application is very slow," right? And geographic locations, right? If they move, say most of the salespeople, they keep traveling, right? And when they move across different states or different locations, they also run into some of these performance issues, right? And while there is always a demand to have a rich UI with good customer experience, but at the same time, that also has a direct impact on the performance, right? So this is some of the common concerns that we see from the end users who are using the Salesforce application. But when you look into the IT team, right, when some of the infrastructure or the development team are trying to debug some of these issues, some of the common issues that we hear from them is, hey, there are a lot of exceptions that are thrown from Salesforce. We are not able to identify what these exceptions are, and then it requires a lot of knowledge about the architecture and that a lot of information about the application at an overall level, right? And again, Salesforce has a lot of log files, but it's always critical when there is an exception or when there is an error that is thrown out. It's always very hard to locate the exact issue and then identify what is the real cause of performance issues, right? So we keep hearing this not just from the end users but from the IT team. These are some of the performance concerns that we hear more from a Salesforce standpoint, right? But what are the typical challenges, right, that we have seen when validating, performance validating on some of the Salesforce implementations, right? One common thing is customization risk, right? So Salesforce, like I said, it provides a platform to customize the code that is getting written. But when we look into developers, right, most of them, and Salesforce also defines some of the coding guidelines, best practices that they need to be followed when you customize the code on Salesforce. But often, given the criticality, given the time constraint, developers don't follow some of these guidelines or best practices, and they end up creating customization code without some of these proper controls. And when you release the application with the bad code, we always see that being the primary primary issue for performance bottlenecks, right? So customization risks are one of the key things. And with Salesforce, with the rich UI that it provides, it also very critical that all these components and best practices are properly used to create the application, right? The second common risk that we normally encounter when we do Salesforce implementation is on the integration side. So Salesforce usually integrates or provides options to integrate with enterprise applications as well as with third-party applications, right? And that's very critical to ensure that it collaborates across the organization, able to share the data, and then also able to retrieve data from the enterprise, use that in some of the dashboards within Salesforce, right? So often when there is an integration that happens with the enterprise application or with third-party application, performance issues pop up, right? And predominantly on the timeout issues, the kind of data that Salesforce sends to the backend enterprise, and the time it takes for the enterprise applications to process the data and then respond back, right? So we always run into some of those integration issues more from a Salesforce standpoint. And the third one is predominantly on the governor limit, right? Given that Salesforce is a multi-tenant architecture, the same infrastructure is getting shared across multiple organizations, right? And to ensure that everyone gets a proper share of the infrastructure, Salesforce internally provides some limits on the usage of different resources, right? So based on the subscription that an organization has with Salesforce, there are limits being exposed at different levels, right? One of the critical aspects is it's very critical to understand based on the implementation, based on the subscription that we have, what are the governor limits that we have, one at a design level and two at the execution level, right? So Salesforce limits these governors, provides there is a limitation on how many values or fields or objects that you use when you design an application, and similarly during runtime there is also limits on various parameters, right? So it's also some of the developers they don't understand some of these limits, and if this is not properly validated and tested, and if the concurrency or high volume is also on the higher side, we often see governor limit exceptions that's happening in the application standpoint. So it's very critical to understand the limits that we have from a Salesforce implementation and address this as part of the strategy. Right. The fourth key risk is on latency. We spoke about Salesforce being accessed across globe, but the different communication channels, right? Salespeople, the marketing team, they use laptops. Some of them use iPads. Some of them use mobile devices, and now with IoT coming in, smart watches, smart devices are also being used to access Salesforce application, right? And they get different types of data from each of these things, and these guys, they keep traveling across the globe. So obviously it's also very critical when we do on Salesforce implementation to understand where these sales teams are placed out of, how they are geographically spread across, and what would be the typical pattern in which they access the Salesforce application. And it's also very critical that proper planning is done on understanding the end customers or the end users who will be using the application, and also validating that before production, to ensure that no matter what is the communication device that is being used, or no matter which geographic location they are going to be in, they have seamless performance, right? So that's one of the key risks that we have seen, and it needs to be addressed. The fifth one is predominantly on the environment aspects. When you look into Salesforce, Salesforce provides a sandbox environment for performance testing, but you can't directly run a test like you do in a normal environment, right? You need to submit the plan to Salesforce, review the plan with Salesforce, ensure, give them an overview on what is that you're planning to test, what are the scenarios that you're going to test, what is the max load that you're going to simulate, submit the plan, get proper approval from Salesforce team, and it requires a minimum of 1 to 2 weeks, right, to submit the plan, review, and then get an approval. And then once you get a sandbox environment, you'll be able to run the test, right? So some of these environment related risks needs to be planned upfront for any Salesforce implementation, so that you know the environment is not available immediately. You need to pre-plan, book the environment, get your plan reviewed, and then have everything ready from a performance testing standpoint. The last risk is predominantly on the monitoring aspect. Salesforce being a black box, while it has some tools from a monitoring standpoint, but when you want to really pinpoint a performance bottleneck, there are multiple log files, multiple tools that needs to be leveraged to identify the root cause of performance issues, right? So always it's very critical to create simple utilities which will pick data from different log files, leverage tools like Splunk or ELK kind of a stack, create some customized tools which can pick the right data from the debug logs, event logs, or from some of the Salesforce supported tools, and then create the required dashboards, right, which will help you to identify and pinpoint the performance issue when you run the large scale test, right? So these are some of the common risks that we encountered when we had the Salesforce implementation, and these are some of the risks that needs to be addressed when you plan for your performance testing. So from a end-to-end strategy, right? So how do we address some of these risks when we define our strategy and ensure that all these aspects are covered, right? More from a Salesforce implementation standpoint, most of the customers, there is a common myth: hey, it's a SaaS product, and I don't need to do any performance testing on this product. Salesforce guarantees, they provide. We have signed SLAs with Salesforce. They guarantee performance availability of the Salesforce application, right? But in reality, and they go into production as well. So what we have also seen with some of our customers is they go live, and then we started seeing some of those performance issues, right? So when we do that detailed analysis, we also found that while Salesforce is a SaaS product and they have SLAs, they also comes with some of the constraints like governor limits, and they also provide all these SLAs only for the tool or code that is running on Salesforce, right? So any external customizations that you apply on, or any third-party integrations that you have, or any integrations that you have with your enterprise application, it's the responsibility of the client organization who's buying Salesforce to ensure that these are also working seamlessly in the end-to-end infrastructure, right? So more from validating the Salesforce, I think one common thing that we normally recommend is first thing is on the Salesforce layer, right? And if there are a lot of customizations that are being done on the base package, it's very critical to do a single user performance, use some of the Salesforce tools. I'll talk about some of the tools that are available in the next slide to see how these tools can be leveraged for single user profiling, right? And it can also be integrated into your CI/CD pipeline to understand at least the developers are following the best practices, and so some of those governor limit breaches or some of those best practices are followed, and the source code analysis will help to identify some of those issues from a Salesforce coding standpoint, right? So that's the first aspect. Second is to run a single user profiling to validate how the end-to-end response time looks for a typical transaction, identify where the bottlenecks are, and then provide that detailed recommendations, right? And third, it's also very critical, given the governor limit exceptions, it's also very critical to understand what are the governor limits that are forced for the specific implementation, and then also validating that against the NFRs. Is my application, or what is the concurrent users that I'm expecting? What is the peak hour, peak day, and then also understanding how the end users are spread geographically, and then also ensuring that those things are validated as part of the governor limit breaches, right? To ensure that all these things are covered when we just look into the Salesforce layer. So this is the first thing. And second thing is also when you do this integration with your enterprise application or third-party application, I think it's very critical that some of those APIs or services that are consuming the data coming in from Salesforce, or if it is going to send some data proactively to Salesforce, is also properly tuned and validated from a performance standpoint, right? So again, a typical performance validation to ensure that the enterprise applications scale up and then they are able to handle all the volumes is one critical thing that needs to be done. And then it's also critical to run this along with the integrations, right? And mostly there are third-party services that gets integrated into the Salesforce application wherever it's not possible to get a real third-party application. It's recommended to virtualize some of those third-party services so that we'll be able to mimic the end-to-end scenario and then get the holistic view from a performance standpoint. The last one is from a real end user standpoint, right? It's also very critical to validate the performance of for users connecting with different devices. Is there a difference in performance? And if it is a mobile app that is getting used for accessing Salesforce, what is the impact versus accessing the application via our web page, right? And monitoring it and then fine tuning some of those aspects is also very critical. And then more from an end-to-end standpoint, simulating all the load that the Salesforce application is planned for, simulating all those concurrent user loads, and then validating that is also one of the critical aspects, more from a pre-implementation kind of a scenario, right? And post-implementation, it's also very critical to understand, continuously monitor the performance of the application from different geographic locations and then see how the performance is getting impacted by different users. And then proactively, if there is a performance issue from any specific location, proactively address it as part of the strategy, right? So these are some of the key things that needs to be taken care and needs to be addressed from a Salesforce implementation standpoint. While from a performance and a monitoring standpoint, we always know that there are a lot of tools that are available, more from an industry standpoint as well as from a Salesforce standpoint. Given that Salesforce is a black box, there are some limitations. So I'll quickly touch upon some of the tools that can be leveraged, right? So we spoke about real user monitoring or synthetic monitoring. So tools like Dynatrace, App Dynamics can be used. And when we talk about end-to-end load simulation that needs to be done, tools like Neotys, JMeter or load runner can be leveraged, right? And it has the capability to simulate the high volume tests that are required. And with Neotys cloud in place, you'll also be able to simulate the end users from different geographic locations and then mimic the real scenarios, right? So some of these things can be done proactively with some of the current load testing tools. And the second key thing is if you want to do a single user profiling, Salesforce provides some of these tools like Lightning Inspector or Community Page Optimizer, which gives a detailed view, right? It's something similar to your web page breakdown analysis, right? The Lightning Inspector is a Chrome plugin which will help us to debug the performance at the UI level and then give a breakdown of where the time is spent, what are the components that are consuming time. It will help the developers to identify and then fix any issues, right? And Community Page Optimizer is also one of the tool that is available, which can be leveraged for doing single user profiling, right? So these are some of the tools that can be leveraged from an end user standpoint. When we look into Salesforce monitoring as such, right? So Salesforce, there are not much tools that are available, but when there are a lot of log files, a lot of tools that Salesforce provide, right? One common thing that can be used by the developer is the developer console. Developer console has a lot of utilities, right? It provides all the data to identify the long-running components. It also helps to identify the Apex callouts and queries that contribute to the increased response time, right? So this is a good place to start for any developer to start using the developer console to debug the code and ensure that some of these performance issues are addressed. And there are also a lot of source code optimizers both tools like external source code monetized, like SonarQube can also be leveraged, but there are Salesforce specific tools that can also be leveraged from a source code analysis standpoint to identify performance issues. The second key thing is on the log files. Again, log files, both debug log and event log, are a great source of information. It helps to identify where the time is spent and how to get into the root cause of the analysis. Right. The only challenge here is both of them are lengthy log files, right? And if you want to find out any Apex timeout issues, or if you want to find out any of the governor limit breaches, it requires a lot of manual effort. So there are utilities that you might need to create on top of these log files to get to the performance issues faster, right? And there are also tools, utilities that Salesforce provide. It's also very critical to understand them and then get a view on how it can be leveraged. Salesforce Optimizer is more like a tool which you can use it after the implementation. Like I said, Salesforce has 3 releases every year, and they continuously optimize the application objects. They bring in new objects. They constantly tune the application for performance, right? So in that process, they always they bring in new objects with hype, which will improve the overall performance, and they also depreciate some of the objects and functions, right? So it's also very critical to use Salesforce Optimizer to understand which of the workflows are inactive, which of the objects are not used, and see how that can be optimized, right? And this is one of the critical exercise. Even after Salesforce moves into production, it's also very critical to look into some of these data and then constantly validate the technical depth and then continuously optimize it, right? So to improve the overall performance, also to ensure that these limits are within the control. But more from a downstream interfaces or the backend systems, traditional APM tools can be used. Be it New Relic, Dynatrace, or AppD, can be used to monitor any of the downstream applications, right? More from this will predominantly help us to monitor from a performance standpoint, but also it is also very critical to validate the application from a resilience standpoint as well, right? Given the need that if one of the enterprise application goes down, that will have a direct impact on some of the customer-facing applications, right? And if there are performance or governor limit breaches in the Salesforce application, that also will have a direct impact on the availability of the application, right? So it's also very critical to monitor some of these things proactively, and then also validate the Salesforce implementation at an end-to-end level with the enterprise applications in place from a resilience standpoint as well, right? And then identify some of these performance issues. Right. So there are a few caselets. We have done a lot of implementations from a Salesforce standpoint, and often, like I said, we identified 40 to 50% of the issues that we have identified are predominantly the customization issues, right? Where the developer has not followed these Salesforce coding best practices, and that often resulted in performance issues, right? So that's a common issue that we have identified. And the second common thing is on the integration aspects, right? Where when it interacts with the third party or the enterprise applications, that's where we have identified most of the performance issues. And governor limit breaches and some of those CPU timeouts or heap issues is the common thing that we have also identified across our implementations, right? So just in, I know we are running out of time, so just to summarize, Salesforce implementations are increasing. CRM overall from a CRM standpoint, adoption of CRM tools are increasing, and Salesforce adoption has been increasing. So it's also very critical to validate the Salesforce implementation from a performance standpoint, from an availability standpoint, and ensure that end-to-end aspects are covered as part of our strategy, right? Both pre-implementation as well as from a post-implementation standpoint, constantly monitor the application and then see how this can be fine-tuned for better performance. So thanks for the time. I'm open for questions. Back to you, Henrik.
So I had a few questions related to the tools, the toolings. and especially the Salesforce optimizer that you were referring to. So I would be very interested to see if there's any ability to automate the usage of this tool, collect some data, so then you can sort of proactively getting some indicators on daily basis and follow how your implementation is behaving. So that will be my first questions. And then on the second questions, it's indirectly related to the monitoring as well. Salesforce has SLAs on the availability side. How would you recommend to collect the right metrics to measure these SLAs? Because obviously, if you have an SLA, we as a customer, we intend to measure how if the SLA has been violated by Salesforce or not. So that could be also part of the overall process, something that needs to be also handled by the project as well. So please.
Sure. So for your first question, Henrik, Salesforce Optimizer, right? It's more like a standalone application that lives outside of the Salesforce environment, right? And it collects most of the data on the limits, the objects that are depreciated, which are currently consumed by the current implementation, and then it also identifies the rules which are not active, and then provides a recommendation on some of the inactive rules, right? And some of those fields, reports which are not properly consumed by the application is also something that you get as a report, right? So again, this happens only when there is a release, or when there very specifically, like I said, Salesforce has 3 releases in a year, and after every release, it's very critical to run this and then validate, get that info, and then see how it can be fine-tuned. So that's one. Second, that's a Salesforce at a platform level. But if there are customizations that are happening within your application, and if you are releasing features on a regular basis, then yes, it is highly recommended to run this after every release. Collect the data and then see if there are breaches, if there are unused objects that are being used, and then constantly look into it, right? So today we have also created some of those utilities which will automate the data collection and then provide that view. It also needs to be integrated into the overall APM platform level, right? So that from a customer standpoint, they get one dashboard which will help them to get the performance across from an end user standpoint, and then also we'll also get some of the metrics specific to Salesforce. But the challenge is the current APM tools, that there are limitations. Some of these metrics are not properly captured and reported, and that's something, like you rightly pointed out, we might need to create those utility and then provide this as a add-on feature for any Salesforce implementation, right? So that's one. For your second question, yes, to get the view, Salesforce is still a black box, right? And we still need to access the debug logs, the event logs, to collect the data from all these different log files, and then get an end-to-end view on the overall performance, right? So that there are some small utilities. Once you have a good understanding on the event logs, debug logs, you'll be able to create some small utilities which will parse those log files, pick those data points that would be required, and it will also help you to correlate with the overall end-to-end performance of an end-user journey as well, right? So it's critical to map that. Today, that there are limitations, and some of those APM tools are not providing it. But when we look into the overall aspect, right, it's very critical to get those data integrated and then get that holistic view to identify and then fix performance issues.
So one of the questions I like to ask, because it's been asked in the chat, and I think it's very interesting question. So it's from Ganesh. Ganesh says, which metric will help us know the high availability of Salesforce layer? Should we do failover, chaos engineering, anything like this?
Okay, more from a Salesforce platform standpoint, like I said, the Force.com or some of their platforms or black box. They don't expose some of these components outside, and they manage and maintain from an availability, from a performance standpoint, right? What we can do from an availability standpoint is monitoring the application from outside and to see how the response times are across each of those components, and when it gets integrated with probably with their event log and debug log, we'll be able to get a holistic perspective on how application is performing, which are the components that are taking time, and where the performance bottleneck is, right? More from a resilience and an availability standpoint, while Salesforce provides that SLAs or SLIs to ensure that they'll be available. The challenge that we always run into is when it starts interacting with the third-party components or with the enterprise applications, right? And predominantly when there is a back-end enterprise application where this data is getting consumed and then where the data gets processed and then it's sent back to the Salesforce application. If one of the component goes down, that has a direct impact to the end user journey, right? So more from an availability and a resilience standpoint, we monitor from a synthetic monitoring standpoint, collect this metric, but validating some of these resilience scenarios or validating at the integration layer and at the backend application and ensure that they are available and meet the SLAs that we have signed with from a Salesforce standpoint.
So do you think, is it quite heavy in respect of the UI, the loading? Is it slower to a normal classical Salesforce? So what would you be your insights on this?
Yes. So Salesforce Lightning is a little bit heavy from a UI standpoint, right? And when compared to Classic, it's a little bit on the heavier side. And that's one of the reasons Salesforce also provides the Lightning Inspector, right, which is more like a Google Chrome extension, right, which can be leveraged. So that it will help you to navigate. You can navigate through a web page, and then you can also get a detailed view on your component trees, which of the components, what is the size of each of the individual components, which is the component which is taking longer time to load, and then it also helps you to optimize from a performance standpoint, right? It's a little bit on the heavier side, and obviously tools like Salesforce Lightning Inspector can be leveraged here to get a view on the overall performance and then optimize it before it gets released into production.
All right. Thank you, Harry, taking the time to build this presentation, to present to the community, and to follow us, because you've been with us with the PAC since almost the beginning. So it's always great to have you on board. Thanks, Harry, so much for your investment.
Yeah, thanks, Index. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.